So now that we've done our basic visualization, before we do any modeling, this has raised questions about, is the number of new cases basically flat? Basically, there are no new cases because things have leveled off. Well, in order to analyze this, we are going to add to our data. So what we're going to do is we will transform our data again. And what we will do is we will add new variables. So we will call new cases to be the cases minus the lag of cases and new deaths. So we will add these two columns to our data sets. Okay, so now we look and we can see, let's just look at the US totals and let's look at, oops, I got an extra thing in there. Let's look at the tail of that. So, well, I'm going to just have to start that all over again. So tail of US totals. But we want to see the new cases and the new deaths, and then everything else. So now I can see the new cases and the new deaths per day in the US as well. Okay, so now that I've got those variables added in, let's visualize these to see if, let's look at the US first and see what this does. So now I'm going to look at the US and I'm going to graph the new cases and the new deaths. It seems I still have the same number of approximately of new cases per day and the number of new deaths per day, but it has flattened out. It still is up a little bit over what it was before, but I can see where the cases are. You see, when we've done this, when we've lived through this COVID-19 crisis, you will recall that the media and everyone started by looking at the total number of cases, but quickly that lost its ability to communicate anything to us because we were either looking at an exponential graph or if we're looking on a log scale, it's just flattened out. So we wanted to look at the new cases per day and try to see what those were doing. So we can do the same sort of thing now for the state of New York. And let's see what's happening in New York right now. Or we could pick any state we want. And I encourage you to do this on your own and choose a state that you're interested in looking at. Or if you're interested in looking at a different country, you can use the global data set to do that. Okay, so if I look at New York, I can see, okay, it had a nice dip down, but then it came back up, right? So, and it's currently seems to be tailing back off, but it's still reasonably high. Okay, so this is the way we transform our data and then visualize it again. And we can go through this process over and over, as this process will bring up different questions for us to look at. So one of the things we may want to know is, what are the worst and best states? And how do we measure this? Should we look at the total cases or the death rates per 1,000 people? So we want to do a little more analysis. So now we'll transform my data once again to do the, I'm going to group by state. And then within that, I will choose the maximum deaths, the maximum cases for the state, and then the population for the state, and compute the deaths per 1,000 and the cases per 1,000. And then I'm going to filter out where the cases are bigger than 0 and the population is bigger than 0. Now I can take what I have in US state totals, and I will use a verb called slice min, which will tell me the 10 states with the smallest deaths per 1,000. So these are the deaths per 1,000. Let's see if I can get it to where that is a little bit where we can actually see what those are. Let's select deaths per 1,000, cases per 1,000, and everything else. So now I've just dropped off the population. But I can see now the deaths per 1,000 rates and the cases per 1,000 rates and the 10 states that have the lowest deaths per 1,000 rate. Okay, so I can do this kind of analysis. I can also look at the worst cases, right? Which are the worst states, with the same. And here again, I'm going to select deaths. Let's see if I can copy that. So now I can see which states fared the worst of all of the states so far in terms of their deaths per 1,000 people due to COVID. So this gives me that data, seeing that New Jersey and New York, so these are all Northeast states, Mississippi falls in there, so forth. Then, so this just is a different way to analyze the data, right? There's a lot of different ways we could look at the data. It's important to remember that as I do this analysis, I should always be asking questions, right? Are the deaths reported the same in all of these places? Do I trust the data that I'm looking at? Okay, so just because I've got a set of numbers does not mean that I can use it without thinking about where the data came from, how it was reported, and how valid it is. Okay, that's going to conclude this video. We'll come back and talk a little bit about modeling and communicating your results.